Hello everyone and welcome back. This is Leviscus, and in today's Basics of Hearthstone tutorial video we are going to be going over the different card types, the different spell types, and the different minion abilities that can be found within Hearthstone. In Hearthstone there are three different types of cards that can be played. There are spells, minions, and weapons. There are 5 different types of spells that can be found within the game, ranging from direct effect spells, area of effect, secrets, crowd control, and attribute buffs, or just buff cards. First we will go over the direct effect and area of effect spells. Direct effects are spells that have a single ability that can target either minions or players and have certain effects that they can do, ranging from dealing direct damage, healing either minions or your hero, drawing cards, silencing enemy minions, etc. Spells that have an area of effect ability, such as Arcane Explosion that is showcased here, can either deal damage to all minions and heroes, or can heal. There is a certain, I think, a priest card. It's actually an AoE silence. So there's quite a few different AoE abilities that can target multiple targets, including your own minions, enemy minions, and even your heroes. Secrets, crowd control, and attribute buffs, they're a little bit more situational. We'll dig a little bit more into them here. Secrets are spells that are played on your... when you play them, they actually pull up a little icon on your hero, so your opponent knows there's a secret in play. However, the text on the card is hidden until the activated text on the card is met. A lot of them range from dealing damage to a minion when it attacks your hero, triggering to either destroy minions, return them to your opponent's hands, spawn minions on your side of the field. In Freezing Trap's case, it returns an enemy minion when it attacks to the opponent's hand, and it makes it cost 2 more, which can be very useful depending on the situation you're in. Crowd control spells, they are spells that have mechanics that act as removal, but it doesn't necessarily destroy your opponent's minion. Typically they'll reduce, in terms of hexes text there, it transforms an enemy minion into a 0-1 frog with taunt. What that can do if your opponent throws down like a Gruul or say a Core Hound or anything that has a lot of attack, a lot of defense, you can pay 3 mana and like, oh sorry, you have an 0-1 with taunt now. Hope you enjoy that. It can backfire depending on what kind of spells they have in their hand. If you give them, say, like an 0-1 with taunt, and they're like, oh, well, that's fine, I'll play Blessing of Kings and Blessing of Might and make it a 7-6, or 7-5. Sorry about your luck, it's got taunt, you have to deal with that now. So, it's, again, they're situational. You kind of want to make sure you're paying attention to the board, paying attention to what your opponent is playing, and play those accordingly. Attribute buff spells. They are spells that grant buffs to minions or heroes, depending on the card text and what they can do. In most cases, they will increase stats on your minions, such as Mark of the Wild here, which gives a target minion 2/2 and taunt. These are very nice cards. Again, they're situational. A lot of times you're going to want to make sure when you play them, it's going to give you an advantage, it's going to give you the upper hand. So as you're playing, as you're learning the game, learning more about the mechanics, you'll learn what situations are good situations to put these cards into play, and what instances or situations may not necessarily be the best to play them at that time. Move on to our minions. There are 2 types of minions in Hearthstone. They are class specific, meaning they can only be played by a certain class, and neutral minions, which can be played by all classes. We're going to get a little bit more in depth in terms of specific cards when we go over each individual class in videos 4 through 12. I'm actually going to be going in, playing as each class, building decks specifically to showcase certain class specific, like spells, minions, get a little bit more in depth in how each class plays. So, not necessarily going to go over all the minions today. However, in future videos we will get a little bit more in depth with those. There are 9 different types of minion abilities, plus 2 special abilities which we will go over at the end. These abilities are Charge, Taunt, Spell Power, Wind Fury, Enrage, Battlecry, Divine Shield, passive abilities, and triggered abilities. We will start with these 4. Charge. If you play a minion with Charge, such as the Reckless Rocketeer, when a minion with Charge comes into play, typically they cannot attack or do anything until the next turn. If you play a minion with charge, it can attack the instant it hits the board. So these can be very, very good in turning the tides of battle. If your opponent has a minion out that's, say, like a 4/5 or a 6/5 with taunt, it's kind of holding up, you're being able to attack the enemy hero. You're like, oh, well, that's fine. I've got this Reckless Rocketeer. It's a 5/2. Low health, lots of damage, quick burst, wipe out the taunt minion. You're wide open to hit your opponent. Speaking of taunt, minions with taunt, they must be attacked first before you can hit any other minion or your opponent's hero. Taunt minions can be a pain to deal with, but they are a blessing to have on the field if you can get multiple of them out at a time. Maybe not even necessarily multiple. If you can get one that you can keep alive, the 3/3 Iron Fur Grizzly is actually a decent one you can keep alive if you can buff its health up a little bit. But they're good crowd control as far as being able to keep minions off the board, keep your hero from getting attacked early on. They're definitely good to have late game as well, especially if your health has gotten low. It keeps pressure off of you, allows you to draw a couple more cards, allows you to potentially get board control and turn the tide of battle. Spell power. Minions that grant spell power. There's quite a few, ranging in costs. Some of them are more powerful, some not as much. The Kobold Geomancer is a good example of an early spell power minion. What spell power does, for every minion that you have out on the board that has spell power, when you play spells, that grants that spell additional damage, additional healing on top of what the card text says. So if you, say, have a Kobold Geomancer out and you would want to play Shiv, which is a 1-cost rogue card, deals 1 damage, draw a card. If you have the Kobold Geomancer in play with spell power 1, when you play that Shiv, it will then deal 2 damage to a target minion or enemy hero and still draw a card. So for every spell power you have out on the board, increases damage by the number of spell power reflected on that card. So if you have 3 minions out with spell power +1, that gives your spells an additional 3 spell power. So if you're a mage, it won't necessarily, like with Arcane Missiles, it won't increase each attack by 3, but it will shoot 3 more missiles. So for 1 mana, you're shooting 6 missiles that deal 6 damage total to random enemy minions and the enemy hero themselves. So definitely nice to have if you're if you have a spell-heavy deck or you're wanting to deal a lot of damage with what spells you have in your deck. Definitely good to have. Wind Fury. Minions with Wind Fury. It's pretty straightforward. They can attack twice each attack phase. Now, unlike Charge, they can't attack when they initially hit the board. However, if you can keep them alive, they can deal devastating amounts of damage, especially if you can buff them up. So say you have this Thrallmar Farseer in a Paladin deck, you throw it down turn 3, turn 4 you've got maybe like a Blessing of Might or 2 in your hand. So you have 2 of them, you got lucky and drew both. You throw +6 damage on that minion, it's now an 8/3, deals 16 damage in 1 turn. Can be very devastating early game and even late game if your opponent's not prepared for it. So definitely can be a very quick turn in the game for you. Next we will look at Enrage. Minions with Enrage gain attack whenever they take non-lethal combat damage. Now non-lethal obviously would mean it doesn't kill the minion. The Armani Berserker is a good example of a Enrage card. It's definitely good in mage decks. I've actually had this played against me quite a few times. The mage hero power deals 1 damage to any minion or hero. So throw out an Armani Berserker. Turn 3, it's still on the board. You're like, oh, okay. You peg it for 1 yourself. It becomes a 5/2. Very good early damage card. There are other minions that have the same effect. I think there's a couple that actually have a lot of health. But still only enrages once. Okay, let's see. Minions, we'll go over with Battlecry. Minions with Battlecry have a specific ability that triggers when they come into play. In this instance, the Novus Engineer, when it hits the board, you draw a card. There are other ones, like the Ironbeak Owl. When it comes into play, you silence a minion. There are a lot of cards that have really good battle cries. A lot of them are card-based as far as drawing cards. But there are a few that when they hit the board, they deal direct damage. You can silence, you can heal. It just depends on the type of minion you're playing. So minions with Battlecry, very good to have. Really not too awful situational. There are certain ones you would want to play at certain times over others, especially if you have minions that can deal damage and or heal. So you'd kind of want to wait, especially on a couple that can deal decent amount of damage, like 2 or 3. Pick off a couple of your opponent's, not super weak minions, but weak enough that you can clear the board of them relatively easily. Alright, we'll jump into Divine Shield. Minions with Divine Shield must take lethal damage twice in order to die, which means if this Scarlet Crusader comes into play, has Divine Shield, it'll show up, it'll have a little yellow bubble around your the portrait, indicating that it has Divine Shield. So it must be hit once, and it doesn't even have to be lethal damage to get rid of the bubble. Any 1 damage thing, pop in the bubble, that gets rid of it. So any damage at all will get rid of your Divine Shield. However, you would have to attack the minion at that point twice unless you have a spell that deals damage to get rid of that minion. Silence will also get rid of Divine Shield, and actually Silence is a really good mechanic. It will wipe card text completely, so if your minion has Enrage, certain activated abilities, anything like that, Silence wipes it completely. So it gets rid of Divine Shield, Charge, whole 9 yards. So definitely not bad to have a couple Silence spells in your deck. And there are also 2 passive kind of abilities we can look at here. There's an active passive that minions that have an active passive ability have an ability that is permanent once in play, and it requires really nothing else to activate. So in this case, the Timberwolf, when it comes into play, every other beast you have on the field automatically gets +1 attack. Now if that card were to die, that ability goes away. It doesn't require you to play anything else for the ability to trigger. As long as you have beasts in play, or when you play beasts, they automatically get a +1 buff. So if you have ways to keep cards like this alive, they're definitely good to have. I think Raid Leader is another good one. It's a 2/2 for 3. All of your minions have +1 attack. Doesn't matter if they're beasts, whatever. So universal active passives are very nice to have on the board, especially if you can get multiple up and you can keep them alive. You can end up dealing lots of damage depending on what the card text reads. Triggered abilities, such as the Knife Juggler here. Minions with a triggered ability, the abilities trigger when the card activation condition is met. So in the Knife Juggler's... well, my brain died. In the Knife Juggler's instance here, every time you summon a minion, he deals 1 damage to a random enemy, minion, or hero. Which can be pretty devastating if you can get a couple of these out early game. I've actually had this happen a couple times. Get 2 Knife Jugglers out early and keep them alive, which is kind of hard to do because they're going to be working very hard to get rid of them. But every time you play a minion at that point, if you have a couple low-cost minions, you pop. Each one's throwing a knife, so you have 2 of them in play. That's 2 damage, depending on how much, how many lower cost minions you have to throw out early game. Can be pretty good at clearing out the board early game and doing a lot of damage. It is a 3/2 for 2 with that ability. Very, very strong card. And there are quite a few others that kind of work in this way as well. So keep an eye out for those because they are definitely worth having. The 2 special type of card abilities, these are specific to the Rogue and Shaman only. Rogues have an ability called Combo. How it works, cards with Combo have an ability that triggers if played after another card is played in the same turn. They're in quote-unquote comboing with that card. So in this instance, the SI7 agent, say you have a 2-cost minion in your hand, you've got 5 mana, and you're like, okay, I want to get this SI agent out. Well, to fully benefit from its card ability, you'll play your 2-cost minion first. That in turn will allow this card to combo. When it comes into play, since it comboed off the first card, it can then deal 2 damage to whatever. I think Cold Blood works the same way, Eviscerate works the same way. With Cold Blood, it typically will give a minion 2 attack. If you combo it off of another card, it then gives 4 attack to a minion. The same thing with Eviscerate. Typically deals 2 damage to a random enemy minion or hero. If comboed off another card, then deals 4 damage. So definitely a really strong, really good mechanic for the rogues. A lot of people right now are saying certain cards make their combo abilities a little overpowered. I believe Blizzard's looking into it. But overall, a very strong ability, very strong playstyle for the rogue. Makes them probably one of the better classes to play right now. Shaman have the Overload ability. and only they have access to the Overload mechanic. Cards with Overload allow their caster to play more expensive spells earlier in the game than they would have rather been able to play them normally. If you do play a spell with Overload, what that does, and we'll use the Lightning Bolt as a little reference point here. Lightning Bolt costs 1 to play. It deals 3 damage to whatever you want to hit with. Overload 1, what that will do, so say if you play Lightning Bolt first turn, that uses up your 1 mana crystal, you gain Overload. The next turn, that locks up one of your mana crystals, so you have 2 mana activated, you can only use 1 for that turn. So basically Overload, it lets you jump ahead early at the cost of mana later. So if you'd play, I think the Shaman has a 7/8 taunt minion, it costs 5, but it's got like Overload 3. So you punch it out 5th turn, you got a really strong taunt minion, but you're really going to be hurting for mana the next turn. So if they play something to counter that, or to get rid of it, and gain really good board control, you're going to be hurting the next turn trying to come back. So it's definitely more situational than anything else. Make sure that you're paying attention to your mana, where it's at, and that you're not going to literally screw yourself over the next turn, because that can happen pretty quickly. Weapons and weapon abilities. Most classes, I believe with the exception of the Priest, the Mage, the Warlock, and Druid, I think all the rest of them have access to weapons, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure the other 5 have access to weapons. I know Hunters do, I know Rogues do, I know Paladins do, and I know Warriors do. Thinking that's it. Anyway, many of them do have access to weapons. What these do is they allow your hero to attack. Weapons will have an indicator of how much attack they do and how much durability they have. Every time you attack with a weapon, it will lose 1 durability for that turn. When a weapon reaches 0 durability, it is destroyed. Certain weapons will have certain abilities that they have for themselves, such as the True Silver Champion for the Paladin. Whenever your hero attacks, you restore 2 health to your hero. Very good, very strong card, 4 cost, 4 damage, 2 durability. So very good for eliminating decently strong taunt minions, dealing direct damage to your opposing hero, and gaining health back in the process. I think there's other ones such as the Rogue's Perdition Blade. It actually has a combo ability. It deals 1 damage normally when it comes into play. If you combo it off of another one, it deals 2 damage instead, and it's a 2 attack, 2 durability for 2 mana. So deals 4 damage in 1 turn depending on how you play it. So definitely not a bad card at all. I think that wraps it up for this tutorial video in, like I said before, in parts 4 through 12. We're going to be going over each class. I'm going to be playing a game with each of them with a custom-built deck, showcasing their different class-specific minions. Probably not all of them, but most of them. All of their class-specific spells and how they work. We'll be going over how their hero powers work in play. Certain card comboing potential for each class, so casting certain spells on certain minions at certain times, and overall just they're all overall unique play styles and how their strengths and weaknesses depending on who they're playing allow you to take advantage of certain situations or maybe not so much in others. We'll also try to explain a little bit more how to stay ahead in a match, or at least stay on even footing with your opponent. And hopefully a lot more. So thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you here for part 4. Thank you so much.